Welcome to the Paranormal Debunk Podcast. This is Daniel.
All right, good morning. Good morning once again. Sorry about the delay and all. All right, I just want to come in by introducing you. How I actually discovered your page. I discovered you on Twitter through Mary Ekete. You were having a discussion with her on Twitter, and I discovered it. That was I discovered your app. You were quite outspoken about. I think you are still quite outspoken about your stand on religion and stuff, Sha. All right.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. All right. Uh, Before I actually get into the topic, like, what do you think about the rise of new atheism, the rise of atheism in Nigeria? Like, like your opinion on
Well,
that?
I think the recent states that we've been seeing, it's not been very massive in a sense. It's still been low level, but I think it's a very positive thing, especially the one that's been going on social media, because um, aside from the fact that it indicates that people are more aware of free speech, the freedom of speech. It also indicates that there are more people who are not only willing to think critically about their core beliefs, but also willing to challenge dogma and are unafraid to speak. So just to clarify, I'm not really a fan of the term new atheism because uh, people often associate that term with the likes of Richard Dawkins,
Yeah.
Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Dan Dennett, who published a series of books in the early 2000s. And there's really nothing particularly new about those guys, except that, they just happened to write at that particular time. Their
Yeah.
books were popular,
Yeah.
and maybe some of them, like Richard Dawkins, for example, was especially very, should I say, forceful. I wouldn't say forceful
Like
too,
he's very
but he had
outspoken
this
on it. Yeah.
very
Yeah. Outspoken on it. Yeah.
unapologetic approach. You
Yeah.
understand?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So he had this unapologetic approach, and that ruffled a lot of religious people's feathers. And I think that's why people use that term new atheism. But I don't identify with anything called new atheism. Um, I'm an atheist in the sense that I do not believe that there are anything, there's anything called that's worthy of being called a god, either in whatever sense that people use the term. So that's basically what it is. So I'm happy about the rise of skepticism in Nigeria, and I hope that it continues that way for forever and ever. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. The it's been polarized. Like the word atheism is being polarized these days. Like when I get on Twitter and I see people like they are would I call it blind logic or so. Like a lot of people, like it's reactionary. Like this some people, a lot of people that actually identify themselves as atheists are actually they are actually very like they are like they call themselves patriots, that like they are like they're against the influence of the Europeans, the past, on their present history. Not like the past, generally on the past, but the influence of Europeans on the general history. And a lot of atheists out there are angry. I understand the feeling, like when you get out of religion and you feel like, wow, how could you be so blind to these things? And that is actually something that seems like mathematics to me. That seems like 2 plus 2 to me. A lot of people out there are just angry out there. Like it is
Yeah,
it is
for
almost it is almost impossible to actually get get a sit down conversation, a normal conversation with a lot of people. And this the anger could actually be useful, but in a way it's actually very bad. Like when I follow that freeze on the so-called leader of the free people. I follow him on Twitter and Instagram, and it feels like like he's very angry about religion and stuff, about its influence on people. But still, I wish he was here to actually correct me on this, but he isn't so. I don't think he is able to have a sit down conversation with someone yet. you
Well,
make a point, then you reply with ad hominem attacks.
to to clarify some basic things. First of all, Daddy Freeze is not an atheist.
I know he's not, but it's very
He's a
spoken
theist,
against.
but
Yeah,
he just despises the way religion is run in Nigeria and things like that. So that's one thing to note about Daddy Freeze, first of all. Secondly, about people who advocate for things like Pan-Africanism
yeah,
and things like that. I mean, people have different ideologies and stuff like that, but what everyone ought to understand is that none of those things have anything to do with atheism per se.
yeah.
Atheism is simply I mean, there are different ways to define atheism. Some define it as the belief that there is no God. Some define it as the lack of belief or the absence of belief in a God. I think the definition that suits me best personally is the denial or the rejection of the existence of God. That's the one that suits me personally the best.
Oh,
And well, I mean, I'm defining atheism now, not naturalism. So any other thing that anyone wants to bring in, Pan-Africanism, feminism, egalitarianism, no matter what
yeah.
it is, humanism, they don't have anything to do with atheism at its core. Now, people who are atheists can also be those other things. You can be an atheist and a Pan-Africanist. You can be an atheist and a feminist. You can be an atheist and a humanist. You can be an atheist and whatever it is you want to be. But atheism itself is not those things. So people need to learn the distinction between them.
I actually love that. I actually love how to actually like you explained that like it's actually very different. Like it's different. But could you actually say there is actually no God out there? Like you can actually I can't say from in my opinion like I can't say I reject all like there's like I really thought about it yesterday in a way that I've never thought about it before. Like a lot of people actually say that God created us and stuff like that. But when I thought about it yesterday, like I got, of course I don't believe in the Christian God, but I actually granted the premise that could you be omniscient, like if God says he created us, like if he actually created us, of course it's just people saying that, not saying God also. But if God actually say he created us, how can he actually know that he himself isn't created by some spooky intelligent being? Like, can you be actually omniscient in a way that what if there is something that you don't know that you don't know? Like, something you don't know, something you don't know about yourself or about, but
Well, I guess you're asking two sort of different questions. So I'm going to try to answer both of them so
yeah,
that we can move on to the actual topic of
I
the discussion.
understand. Yeah,
I'll start from the second one, which you're talking about. What if God doesn't know that there's something that he doesn't know?
yeah,
Well, I mean, going by the standard definition of omniscience, according to
yeah,
classical theists, or whatever school of theism that you hold to, the idea is that there isn't any true proposition that God doesn't know. There isn't any true proposition that God isn't aware of. Like God is not epistemically lacking in any way. That's the idea of omniscience in that sense. So when you say, what if there are things that God doesn't know? Well, it is to simply tell you that's not God. So to the
well,
first question
of course,
about
yeah.
could
That's
I
right.
be
That's
could I
right.
be could I be absolutely sure that there is no God at all?
Yeah,
Well, I would say it depends on what you mean by God. It depends on the definition of the term God. I mean, people have different definitions for God.
yeah,
People define. I mean, there are people who worship trees. There are people who worship nature. There are people who worship the sun. I mean, you can't say the sun doesn't exist. And
yeah,
if
sure.
someone says that the sun is God,
Yeah,
obviously in that sense, God exists, and you can't deny that. Um, so ultimately, it all depends on what you mean by God. And when you talk to most people who are religious, I'm talking about Christians, Muslims, Jews, and people of other faiths generally, they often refer to a term that connotes a transcendent consciousness. that is worthy of worship. I think those three things are always necessary. A transcendent consciousness that is the proper object of worship. First of all, I'm a naturalist. I'm an ontological naturalist. That means I believe that the natural world is all that exists and nothing exists beyond nature. So, I mean, that's just a rough definition.
Okay.
So, as a naturalist, I would deny that anything is transcendent to nature in that sense, like in the ontological sense.
Would you say you are actually open to? Would you say you actually?
And also,
like, would you say you're
I
actually
haven't.
open
Yeah,
to
I
evidence?
am.
Like,
But I'm gonna get there. Let me just land with the
Okay.
definition I was trying to describe.
Okay.
So, like I said, as a naturalist, I would deny the fact that, or the claim that there is anything transcendent to nature. I would also deny the fact that consciousness can exist apart from brains, which is what you have to be if you are a theist in that sense.
Yeah.
And I would also deny that. I would also deny, although this might not really have anything to do with naturalism directly, in a sense, but it might be sort of like a corollary to naturalism. I would also deny that anything of such or anything at all in nature is deserving of worship. So, in that sense, a transcendent consciousness that is deserving of worship does not exist. That's what I, as an ontological naturalist, would say. Now, to your question, that would I be open to evidence? Of course, I would be open to evidence. The problem with that is that when theists define God, many of them often say that God is not subject to evidence. That
of course, and that's
evidence to prove or to demonstrate
God.
that there is a God, and that's, I mean, for theists like that, it would be a problem. However, for theists who assert that we can have evidence for God, of course, I consider the claim that God exists to be an extraordinary claim. And as Carl Sagan used to say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you're going to give that claim, your evidence would have to be commensurate to it. And so far, I've not seen any line of evidence that is commensurate to the proportion of that. So, but if the evidence comes up today, of course, I'm very open to accepting the truth of the proposition that there is such a thing called a God.
All right. Let's get to the real topic, like the real subject of the topic of the discussion. This is about merit and grace.
Yeah.
I think grace is just an unfair advantage in some way. Like it's grace and merit is like I'm talking about the religious grace. Grace and merit is just something that are actually they are both things, that are actually hard to define. Like grace, how do you explain grace? Is there anything like divine grace? To me, it seems like it always man grace, like human grace. Of course, you find human grace anywhere, and you find something that you actually call luck. And again, I call it an unfair advantage, but not so unfair. Like we get into that later. And merit also. Like, can you actually assess and actually choose people particularly based on their merits? Like merit varies, and how can you actually choose someone like particularly based on their merits? Like, can you actually have access to all of their life experiences and all of the resources that they can actually bring to the table? Could an interview with someone on a chair, like in a room, actually tell you about what it is to them in their lives that they can actually bring to the table? I don't think any examination can actually do that, but I don't think any kind of cosmic grace actually exists. I think it's all human grace. But how do you define divine grace, the so-called divine grace? Like, you see people talk about divine grace.
Yeah. So a little bit of a background to my own, Christian journey, so to speak. I grew up in a sort of like Pentecostal setting. When I got into school, I was more like into word of faith and all that. And then I had some, emotional struggle back in early 2013, where, I was angry at God, that God wasn't helping me with my moral feelings and all that. And then I came across a book by Joseph Prince. As a matter of fact, I still have the book. In fact, it's right here beside me right now.
Wow.
Titled Unmerited Favor. Yeah. So I read that book, and that book really, it transformed my thinking, as a Christian back then. And what the book was all about was the doctrine of grace, 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 grace. And basically, the understanding that Christians generally have of grace, divine grace, and depending on which Christian you're talking to per time, has to do with the idea of gratuitousness, the idea of giving something to people without expecting something in return, especially giving to them something that they do not deserve. As a matter of fact, the word often used for grace in the Bible is the word charis. That's where we get the English word charisma from. So charis has to do with graciousness, about favor, gifts, benevolence. That's what it means. So when Christians talk about divine grace, they're talking about the grace, the kind of grace that God gives. That God gives that grace because of his own loving nature, because of his own benevolent nature, not because of anything that is deserving of that grace in the people whom God is bestowing the grace upon. So that's kind of the idea of grace that I think religious people use. I mean, Christians specifically now, because not every religious doctrine espouses grace in that sense. Well, that's how Christians see it.
All right. Like I have to wonder. I have to wonder why an omniscient being, a supposedly omniscient being and omnibenevolent being, could actually need grace for something like why couldn't he actually go all round, like, and the idea of unmerited favor is actually a very dangerous idea to me, like, unmerited favor. Like the Chinese actually invented the examination system. Like they started doing the Qin dynasty. They started it just to actually put the best people in office, to actually put the best people in office. And just think about if everyone actually call everything grace, and what is the meaning of God's doing? I don't think God actually does anything. I just think human does anything, and people actually get to things by chance or so. But when you actually think about unmerited,
Okay, okay, let me let you land. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, all right. When you actually think about unmerited favor, like, to what extent, where do you draw the line between injustice and unmerited favor? And that is the problem I actually have with the idea of unmerited favor. Like, where do you actually draw the line? Where do you draw the line?
You need to if I may just cut short, because it's like you're scrunching up a lot of questions into
Okay.
speech there.
Okay.
So we need to get something clear, right? Because I like to make sure that I'm addressing the opponent's actual point. Of course, there's no opponent here today, so we're not having that kind of discussion. But what I wanted to clarify is that when we talk about divine grace as a core concept of theology, it's often different from the way I don't want to use the word Nigerian Christians, because I'm not trying to be disparaging here, but it's often different from the way Christians in in Pentecostal circles, which is what we have the most. You're talking about the likes of all these MFM, RCCG winners, and people like that. It's sort of different from the way they apply it. They apply it in a sort of like social context, like, okay, God giving me a job when I didn't deserve it, God helping me pass my exams, God saving me from an accident where maybe other people died, and things like that. So that's sort of like the way Nigerians tend to see grace, in the Pentecostal circle. In the core concept of theology, grace is not really that. Grace in the core concept of theology actually has to do with what I would term salvific grace. That's grace for salvation. The concept there is that all men are sinners. We're all guilty of sin, and God sent Jesus as a free gift, as a free way to be saved, if I could call it that way. And that sending of Jesus had nothing to do with the fact that we asked for it, or we needed it, or we demanded it. In that sense, so it wasn't. It didn't have anything to do with us. It's all by God's providence. It's all by God's benevolence. So God gave the free gift of Jesus to us, and that act of giving the free gift of Jesus is the grace of God. So that grace is available to everybody. That's what Christians, I'm just giving you like the idea of Christian theology.
Or
So I think the reason why I made that distinction is because I think you're talking about you're trying to should I say social grace in which
yeah.
God favors somebody to get a job or things like that. So I just wanted to make that distinction clear.
Yeah.
So if
But
you're going to talk about that, the specific kind of grace you are referring to, if you're going to talk about that one,
yeah,
of course we could go into all the way it's unjust and the way it's. I mean, that kind of grace does not even fit into the idea of an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent God, which is what Christians say that God is.
yeah.
And also, even the core concept of theology, I'm also going to argue that as well doesn't really fit into the idea of an omniscient, omnibenevolent,
Of course, yeah.
omnipotent God. So either way, it's still a problem.
So like for the
So
theological for the
you want me to talk about the second one, right?
yeah, we're talking about that. For the theological meaning
Okay.
of grace, God's grace, does it actually ends there? Like, has grace ended? Like grace, like the so-called grace just defined, and has it ended that God, Jesus Christ, sacrificing Himself at the cross, and has that concept of grace ended? Like, can we actually find any more grace, like in the eyes of God? Like, and in what area can we actually find that any kind of grace from God that will actually fit into the theological sense and not the social sense also?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Um, and I would answer this way. I would say it depends on whom you ask. If you ask some maybe Catholic theologians or stuff like that, they might say something like, God's grace is according to God's providence. I'm not really a Catholic, so I don't know if I'm getting the theology right, but just based on my interaction with different people who are Catholics and stuff like that, they tend to say, God still actively does things in the world, and his doing of those things is according to, his grace, his free act of giving without whatever anyone deserves. So I guess in a sense, you could still extend it into the social context too. It doesn't just stop there. Although when you bring it up to a theologian, a professional theologian, or whatever it is, they might tend to retract and
Yeah,
just
and
limit
argue
it
that
to the
it's not,
salvific
yeah,
grace,
yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, and they will tell you that the primary function is not the social idea; it's the one for salvation. So, but if you ask, most Pentecostal people, most I would say, the mainstream churches around. I mean, what we generally think of as churches in the West, here in Southwest in Nigeria, and in other places in Nigeria like that, what you would find is people would definitely tell you that, yeah, that's God's grace acting. I mean, God. I mean, we see a lot of times when people come around and they say, "Oh, there was an accident. There were 18 people on the bus. 15 people died, but I managed to survive with a little scratch. That must be God." Or they say things like, um, just look at it. You woke up today. Many people didn't wake up and many people slept last night and then wake up this morning. I mean, that must be God, that kind of thing. So we see this idea well perpetuated, not just among the members of the church, but among the pastors themselves. We
Yeah.
hear this from the likes of Adeboye, likes of Olukoya, and all, MFM's Olukoya, and everybody like that. So they keep saying these things, and it's an idea that's pervasive in the Nigerian, I should say, Pentecostal circle. So for them, it doesn't end there. It goes into the society. God's grace permeates everything as well. And when you discuss it with them, they're not so willing to retract into the salvific grace idea like maybe professional theologians or Catholic people might want to be. So I think that's the difference. The Pentecostal people are more willing to accept that God's acts of grace goes on all around us, and it even affects their own personal lives. While some doctrines might want to retract a little bit and limit it to um, just salvific grace without denying that God can actually act in the world as well.
Oh, right. Even a lot of people that actually believe in the so-called divine grace, like divine grace in the social sense, wouldn't want like a surgeon, like a brain surgeon, who
Yeah.
who would actually be operating on your brain. They wouldn't want that kind of that kind of surgeon getting the job, like the position in the hospital without adequate testing, or without a proper test of his abilities, or even a pilot. Just think about a pilot flying an airplane, and you say like you could actually want this for yourself but not for other people. When it comes to a pilot flying an airplane, you wouldn't want him getting into that position without adequate testing, or the knowledge that you are so sure that it won't crash the plane, instead of actually believing that grace will actually get him the job,
Yeah,
or
that's
grace
true.
or grace would actually make him pass his examinations in school. Or you want to know that he actually knows everything about an airplane. Of course, you might want grace for yourself, and this is the paradox,
Yeah.
or the irony for Christians. They might want grace for themselves, but not for other people. Like the sense of that pilot. Like I know two kids that have been paralyzed through injections and stuff, like in hospitals. And I had this friend who said something like she knows a nurse who got the job without the proper interview, and she was saying it was God's grace. And these are the kind of disasters, and the kind of people that causes mayhems and causes other people, like the child, for example, to like that wasn't that the doctors and nurses that weren't adequately tested before getting the jobs. And this is what they call divine grace. And it's just, imagine if sports, like sports clubs actually starts recruiting based on divine grace, and the so-called divine grace, or some kind of sort of networking and connection. No one would actually want that.
Yeah, you're right. And I think this is where I begin to talk about the demerits of this idea of divine grace. I'm not sure it has any merit,
Yeah,
because I mean, like you said, basically anything you want to attribute to divine grace, you can, I mean, as a naturalist, I mean, someone who's a supernaturalist, who's a theist, would easily attribute it to divine action, or an
yeah,
act of God in the world.
yeah.
For someone who denies the existence of God, like I do, for someone who doesn't believe that there is a God, like I don't, um, it's I would be more likely, not even more likely, I would most definitely attribute that to luck, or to some random, deterministic sort of idea that, okay, yeah, you are in this position here, but the fact that you are in this position here to be able to get this so-called favor that you got actually has to do with your history, and not just your history, but the history of every particle in the universe, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's sort of reductionistic. It might sound fatalistic as well, but I'm not sure I'm a fatalist when it comes to determinism or libertarianism or something like that. But I think you could make some kind of quasi deterministic argument that eliminates an idea of divine action or something like that. And even if you don't want to use something deterministic or something, you can always even attribute it to luck, and it will still make a lot of sense, because we know that luck is so it's not an objective phenomenon in the world, but it's something we conceptually apprehend that, okay, this thing is happening, this occurrence that we call luck happens. So I so in that sense, I just said that to show that I don't think there's any merit to the idea of grace. So in the concept of, or to talk about the demerits now, I should say, um, the first thing was what you noted, that it actually trivializes expert, and that's a dangerous thing. I mean, like you said earlier, nobody wants to fly a plane where the pilot is flying on grace
I
and
mean,
not on
yeah, like Grace Airline.
Um, so yeah, truly, I mean, someone who's, well, I mean, imagine if you were to have a heart surgery or something like that, or maybe a brain surgery, and just before you started the surgery, the doctor or the surgeon comes in all dressed and he says, "You know what? I'm actually not a doctor. I'm a pastor. I've never had any formal training in medicine or in surgery. I never went to school. But you know what? I went to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, I fasted, and the Holy Ghost showed me how to perform a surgery perfectly. So don't worry, the power of God's grace is upon me. I'll be able to perform this surgery well. I'm pretty sure that 99.99999999999% of people will say, absolutely not. Thank you.
Of
I'd
course
rather
not.
die than have you operate on me.
Yeah.
So, but this is kind of I mean, that sounds like something overbloated. I mean, that's not actually going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's kind of what we see in someone who maybe you go for an interview or something. He doesn't have enough skills for
Yeah.
the job. He
Yeah.
doesn't have enough expertise for the job. He doesn't even have enough qualifications for the job. But he got the job anyway. And then he says, "Oh, that's grace." But that trivializes expertise because, of course, I'm not trying to say that meritocracy is absolutely good on in its own right as well. But the point is that saying God gives you grace in that sense sort of trivializes expertise. It makes it look like expertise doesn't matter. There's this idea of God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So it just trivializes expertise in that sense. Now I understand why that would hold within the theological core doctrine. I mean, nobody can be an expert at being holy, at being righteous, according to the Bible. So Jesus has to come and give us his gift of righteousness. But then when you're talking about in the secular sense, you can't be an expert in medicine. You can't be an expert in engineering. You can't be an expert in driving. You can be an expert in maybe being a human resource manager or something like that. So in that case, there shouldn't be the idea of grace because it trivializes expertise in that sense. Another thing I would say about this concept of grace is that it cheapens the human condition. It trivializes the human condition. It doesn't take people's pain seriously. Of course, some people when they say this stuff, they sort of like backtrack and all that, but it doesn't actually take people's pain seriously. For example, suppose there is a car accident or a bus accident, and then you have 15 people on the bus. I think
Yeah.
it's usually 14 now because of interstate travel
Yeah.
and COVID-19 and all that. So suppose you have 14 people on the bus and 10 people die. 3 people are seriously injured that they have to be hospitalized. And you came out with just a lip cut, maybe just a cut on the lip or something like that. Of course, you are a Christian who believes in this idea of social grace, if I could call it that. And then you think, oh, God saved me. You didn't think before that maybe the fact that you were the only one wearing a seat belt on the bus
Yeah.
would have been what saved you. But let's even set that aside. It trivializes the condition of those other people. That's the way I look at it, because
Yeah.
I think we should be more expansive in our thoughts. We should be more empathetic in our approach. So when you see people suffering that way, your first reaction should not be, oh, I'm saved, thank you, Jesus, or something like that. It actually doesn't communicate the spirit of love that you claim that Christians have. So that's another thing I have. That's another issue I have with this idea of social grace and all that. And another problem I have with it, and if I was a Christian, I would have this particular problem with it, is that it is theologically problematic. Because, for example, let's say that we are 14 on the bus. In a country like Nigeria, out of the 14, suppose it's in Lagos anyway, out of the 14, roughly 6 might be Christians, maybe 5 might be Muslims, and maybe 1 might be from another religion or some other faith or something like that. Basically, everybody on that bus is most likely going to be religious, because
Yeah.
over 98% of Nigerians are religious, and not just religious, but actively religious in that sense. They pray every day, they go to church at least once a year or something, and all that. So, when those people die, and you say, "Thank God for protecting me. Thank my God. Thank Jesus for protecting me," what happens to the other 5 or 6 Christians on the bus? Was Jesus not protecting them?
Of
Was
course.
Jesus not looking after them? Did Jesus not care about them? And then you now have to come in with different kinds of apologetics to explain that away. Oh, maybe God is calling them home. I've even heard a case in which someone said that a Christian died on the bus because he was going somewhere to go and sin, and
Wow.
God did not want him to go and sin. So
Wow.
God killed him so that God would take him home. I've heard that before.
Yeah, of course.
And
Same here. I've
you
read a
look at
lot
these
of it. Yeah.
ideas, it sounds problematic for anyone who believes in an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God.
But they don't
That
care
he
about
would
that.
do
They don't.
things like that.
As of course, but
to
those who say they
they
don't
don't,
care.
yeah, and like I said, the fact that they don't care about it reinforces my second point, that this idea of cheap grace or social grace actually trivializes the human condition. That's the thing. It trivializes human feelings, it trivializes human emotion, it trivializes pain and suffering.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I see it. So I think at least those 3 points, I can remember them for now. Like I told you, I didn't really prepare my notes for. So, but I can remember those 3 points for now, that those things are actually good reasons to reject this idea of social grace in the way that people use it in Nigeria or in other places.
Yeah, I think in all areas, I think I actually reject the idea of social grace, in a way, because it actually creates some sort of, like, I think what you just said, actually the perfection of narcissism.
And sorry to cut you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's narcissistic.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you. I just wanted to chip in that.
Okay.
I can modify most of these things that I have said about social grace. Maybe not all of them, but most of these things I've said about social grace. I can modify it in a sense and also apply it to salvific grace, to grace for salvation. That's the core theology, the idea of grace within the Christian faith. I can apply it to that too, because that idea is also problematic. As a matter of fact, I think it might even be much more problematic than the idea of social grace, depending on how you present the case anyway. So I just wanted to chip that in, that the fact that I'm criticizing social grace this way doesn't mean that salvific grace gets a pass.
Yeah.
Salvific grace also has its own set of issues.
Yeah. Like even the so-called.
Yeah. So you can carry on. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah. Even the so-called God's grace, like I don't think there's actually anything like unmerited favor, like even in the so-called God grace, like the so-called divine grace, in a way, because if anyone would actually give someone a key to their house, it comes with trust. You don't actually favor someone you don't trust. Like if you actually say there is actually nothing special about someone, for them to they deserve some sort of divine grace or some sort of social, in the social sense, like you're just saying that you're actually partial. That's actually what seems to me, like like you are incapable of actually going all around and actually showing your love to everyone. And in the social sense, like it is the height of narcissism, like in a way like God loves me, what about other people? Like it seems like you said, it is not caring enough. It is like not caring enough or not caring about other people adequately enough. Yeah.
It trivializes suffering and pain.
Yeah. And the thing is that the world is not fair. I think in a way it is the unfairness is actually a good thing, but in a way, because if the world was fair and life was fair, like it actually means that the bad things that happen to you actually deserve it, and the good things that happen to you actually deserve it, and the other people, the bad things that happens to them, like if the world was fair, if God was actually fair, the bad things that actually happens to other people, they actually deserve it. That's how it actually seems to me. Why I think a lot of people can't live with the idea of the world being unfair. That is why they actually invent this kind of idea of God's favor and God's merit and something like that. Or they can't actually explain the origin of the goodness or I think it's a shrug of the shoulder, like a cop out. Like when you can't explain something, explain the origin of some sort of goodness or some sort of bliss or some sort of positivity you actually feel, you attribute it to grace, or either you actually have someone who made something possible for you and you call it grace. It's either or that.
Yeah, I often have a I often have an issue with with saying things like, okay, Christians made this up or religious people made this up,
Yeah,
because
I'm not
I
saying
don't
that
know if
like,
that can
but
be
no,
proven
but for some pop,
in a direct sense.
it can't be proven. I don't mean like they actually made it up in that sense, that the purpose of the making it up, like, like the concept of destiny, for example, the concept of destiny is actually like when you actually have something happen, like you see something that has been predetermined, like often sense when you actually talk about the predetermination of things, you don't use it in a way, like in a positive way. You don't use it in positive situations. But like I said something about Messi and about Mikel and what Ronaldo actually Mikel when we lost in the World Cup, like Mikel was saying something like it wasn't meant to be, like the idea of destiny, like something wasn't meant to be, like it has been predetermined. But when Ronaldo or some kind of boxer actually wins a match or wins a match or wins against someone, they actually use something like, they say something like I worked out to actually get this thing. This thing was actually my sacrifices and my suffering that actually materialized into this kind of positivity. Same way with the idea of grace, like grace. When people say grace, like
Yeah,
God's grace, yeah, they actually have no idea where the positivity actually came from. Or when people actually say something is actually supernatural, it actually means that they don't know how it actually happened, so it is supernatural. I don't mean like they actually made it up, They actually mean what they are actually saying when they say it is actually grace, like it's actually some sort of grace. They mean it, but it seems to me like it's when they
yeah,
have no idea how the positivity materialized, or they made someone do it for them. They call it grace, Like I think just to escape the gifts.
yeah. So
Yeah.
the thing about religious thinking is that one thing that, I mean, in my own reflections and thoughts on religious thinking, one thing that I've noticed so far is that it's heavily teleological, in the sense that it's the idea of purpose, right? It's the
Yeah,
idea of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
agency.
yeah, yeah. The idea of purpose and
And I
agency.
think when you look into the idea of evolutionary psychology, stuff like hyperactive agency detection and stuff like that. Um, it's almost, I mean, I can forgive people who look at the world and say, you know what, this can't just be meaningless. This has to have somewhere it's going. Like there has to be some purpose, some end
Yeah.
to it. There has to be some destiny or some stuff like that. So, and then people keep reflecting on different ideas, different concepts as time and societies evolve in that sense. So, but the
Okay.
main thing is that, I'm just going to say, is that I feel like people think about this grace thing because it ties into their already framed
Preconceived. Yeah.
teleological
Yeah.
worldview. In
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
words, they have this idea that things have to be purposeful. So when they see some event that has some kind of correlation with their desires, they tend to interpret that correlation as some sort of design. Like, I prayed for money to enter into my bank account. And the day after, my uncle that I've not spoken with in a long time just called me and he said, "Hey, what's up? It's been a while. Send me your account number." And then he gave me some money. Huh? How could that happen? That must be God, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so it's this teleological idea, it's this idea of design, this
Mm.
fundamental concept of, there is agency, there's something beyond
Yeah.
us
Yeah. Yeah.
acting
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think once that fundamental concept is there, it's very easy to interpret basically anything at all in
Yeah.
that sense, depending, of course, on your theological boundaries. I mean, there are people who don't believe that miracles still happen now. So for them, it might not be that like that. But still, I mean, just a general theological view, which of course has to be teleological because, um, as I said, the idea of religion has to do with contemplating things about meaning, purpose, morality, how should we behave, stuff like that. So Of course, the idea of morality itself fits into the idea of meaning, because if there isn't somewhere we are going, then we wouldn't be able to say, okay, this is the right way or the wrong way to get there. So I think let's keep that in. That's a little bit extraneous to the discussion. So, but the point I'm trying to make overall is that the idea of grace itself fits into the the religious contemplation of meaning, the perception of teleology in the world. And when I say teleology, I'm not just talking about design. Christians often talk about design, like, oh, how the world looks designed, the planet Earth is just in the Goldilocks zone and stuff like that. The universe has some constants that are fine-tuned for intelligent life and things like that. I'm not talking about that kind of design. I'm talking about purpose, because there's really no design without purpose, right? Like, I think I was discussing this with someone a few days ago. Purpose for me, purpose is the main marker of design. People talk about complexity, people talk about things like that. I don't think complexity is a good marker for design, because people can design very, very simple things. But the point is that the main thing that distinguishes designed things from non-designed things is purpose, even if we don't know what the purpose is, right? So I think when people look at these coincidences and things happening just randomly, and they attribute it to, oh, it's God's grace, it's because they already have this idea of purpose and teleology and goal directedness for every activity in the world. So I think that's the thing. So why I said that is that I tend not to think of religious doctrines and beliefs as things that people just made up. It could be the case that they made it up, but they must have made it up for a reason. It's not just that, look, all these people in my village are stupid, let me just tell them this lie so that they can give me money. I think that's very simplistic, and it's not even realistic, because people are actually not that stupid. But it must be that those people already have some intuitions that such, they already have this idea of teleology that such a doctrine can now fit into and hammer into. So that's kind of the way I see it.
But even if you can actually get rid of the idea of grace and undeserving favor or unmerited favor, as they actually call it, like the danger of unmerited favor, like if you can actually get rid of that, like the world isn't still fair, like by complete chance, your life can actually be at the mercy of someone else, like just by birth. Like you can actually someone could be born into a rich family, and you could be born into a poor family, in a way that you would be present working on their farm and something like that. And that kind of the kind of world in which like your life is at the mercy of someone else, and you might actually need them, and that is something that doesn't actually seem fair to me, but it actually seems like it is not unfair either,
Yeah, it's true. Life is not fair. As far as I'm concerned, of course, it's easy for me to say that because I don't have a teleological worldview. I think things just happen the way they happen, and we are the only conscious agents that we are aware of in the universe or in the multiverse, if there's a multiverse. And we don't really know that the world is going anywhere, that there's any direction. In fact, it seems to be acting as though there is no direction at all. So when things happen, they just happen. And
I'm losing you.
Of course, being rational agents who are able to contemplate the consequences of our actions to others, we shouldn't just stop there and say, oh, well, life is not fair, so whatever happens to you, just take it or leave it. We should actively try to be of help to one another. We should actively try to make other people's lives better. And all that is not because the world is meaningless, but I mean, the world, to me as a naturalist, is meaningless, objectively meaningless, I should say. But the meaning is still there because we put it there. We are capable of rationality, we are capable of thinking, and we are capable of attributing value to things. We can attribute value to people, we can attribute value to objects, we can attribute value to ideas and concepts. So because of that, we can make the world a better place for one another.
Yeah,
Even if we agree that the world is not fair, we ourselves can be fair to one another. We can be
yeah,
just to
yeah,
one another,
yeah.
and we won't have to rely on some
Hmm.
esoteric idea of grace or something.
Yeah, like to actually round this all up, like I think people that actually want grace, that actually pray for grace and actually need grace, actually feel like they actually need grace, and the networking in that sense actually feel like, I think they have the fear of actually falling behind, because if we could actually create a society based on meritocracy that can't be channeled in your own favor, like maneuvered in your own favor, like it would still be unfair. Like we people would actually see others as deserving of their failures and of their situation in a way. Like presently, when you actually see someone that's actually poor, you feel like they are just unfortunate, or they had bad luck in their lives and some things didn't work out for them. But if you actually base a community based on meritocracy, if you actually create a community based on meritocracy and 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 merit generally, we would be creating a world filled with suicide. People would actually be depressed, and they'll be shameful of themselves. Like I'm not brainy enough, I'm not intelligent enough, or I'm not capable of doing these things, and or I think that is the fear people actually have. Like those people actually pray for grace. I think they actually operate on fear.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. They're actually scared of
th-
them
this
them
is
falling
this
behind.
is
Yeah. Hello.
this is actually a very good. It's I can hear you. It's actually a very good point as well,
Hmm.
because when you look at the world and you see that there are people who are smarter, who are richer, who
Hmm.
are more privileged in terms of their placement in society. When you look at all that and you see them, you don't feel special. You feel
Hmm.
like you're not worth it that much. So
Hmm.
it might be comforting to think that there is someone out there or someone up there, God, who still sees value in you.
Hmm.
And since God is the ultimate and he sees value in you, then that means his opinion is what ultimately counts. So it's a very comforting idea. Of course, I'm not saying that people just look at the world and say, oh, look, these people are more special than I am. So let me just think that somebody thinks I'm special so I can feel special. I'm not saying that's how it comes about. I'm just saying that the idea itself can be appealing. I mean, if you already have the belief, maybe from childhood, that God cares about you, God thinks about you, God has written your name in the palm of his hand, something like that. And you look at the world and you see people who are more special out there and everything. It's easier for you to live life thinking, God loves me anyway, God cares about me anyway, God sees me as special anyway. Even though you know that at least on the social level, you are not at par with some other people. The feeling of God seeing you as special gives you that assurance, it gives you that comfort, it gives you that inner peace. It might be
Yeah. Yeah.
difficult for people who
Yeah.
do not have that feeling to, be at peace, or at least that's what some people think. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. Um, for me, for example, I don't think that anybody is more special than I am. And I don't think that I am more special than anybody. Now, somebody might be more educated than I am. Somebody might be less educated than I am. Somebody might be richer than I am. Somebody might be poorer than I am. I mean, in terms of financial wealth. Um, um, these, I see them as differences. They could be social differences, they could be political differences, they could be ideological differences, they could be financial differences, they could be epistemic differences, things like that. Um, but I don't think that those things make you better than anyone else or inferior to anyone else. I think we're all humans, we're all equal, and that equality, that idea exists whether or not there is a transcendent consciousness that is deserving of worship, which is what people would call God. So I think that it's not necessarily the case that one has to believe in a God to counter that feeling of depression or worthlessness and all that.
Oh.
So I think either side, whether you're an atheist or a theist or whatever it is, And atheists can be very happy with their lives and can feel special in their own way, and atheists can feel inferior in their own way too. I mean, I could go into how that can be, but that's not the topic for now. So we'll just leave
All
some
right,
answer.
all right. What I actually think when I was actually thinking about I've been thinking about it for a very long time. Like when I'm actually thinking about it, I think I actually resolved and I actually resolved this in a kind of way that we can actually help other people. Like we can actually help other people until helping them is actually harming someone else. Like even if we actually like even helping someone win an election, if we actually know that they might not be capable of actually leading or something like that, it's actually harming someone else. I think we should help others. To helping them is actually harming someone else. That's where that's my own resolve on that. Like that's what I actually think about merit and grace, and because meritocracy has a downside. You create a world filled with suicide and stuff. Because people feel like they are not deserving or they are worthless in a way. And grace also actually create a world in which people actually feel like you don't have to have the necessary qualifications, and you just have to have some sort of favor, find some sort of favor with some divine cosmic spooky being out there. But I think my own point on that is that you have to help people. To helping them is harming someone else. That's my resolve on that. That's my own final verdict on that.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's
Yeah.
okay.
All right. Till some other time, till you'll be coming back on the show. Have a nice day. You too. Have a nice
Yeah,
day. Yeah.
this has been a very interesting and eye-opening discussion for me as well. So
Yeah.
I suppose you're going to put this online, maybe YouTube or something. I don't really know where you
Yeah.
plan to put it on.
All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right.